morning. Thank you all. And thank you, Umberto, for the invitation and the Florence University of Arts for the opportunity. From my personal point of view, I'll try to explain my line of research in terms of Islamism, Salafism, and how we can use the definition of Islamism and Salafism as a sort of paradigm for the complexities of the Mediterranean area. First of all, a few remarks about Unamid. Unamid is an association of 84 universities coming from both the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. We have partners in Europe, Spain, and Greece, and I saw also some speakers coming from our associated university here, Athens and Montenegro University. And we have, at our core, we have some university in Finland, but our core is in North Africa, in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. We have partners from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, even Libya. We have the Sirte University, even if Sirte is under the control of ISIS. We have relationship with the university is closed, but we still have relationship with some individuals, the rector, President Musa Mohammed, and we have the head of international relations offices. And we have partners in Egypt, from more or less, and we are trying to extend our network also to Iraq and Iran, because they are not part of Iran is not part of the Arab world, but obviously is part of the Middle East. The mission of Unamid is very simple and at the same time very challenging. Our aim is to promote dialogue and cooperation between the north of the Mediterranean and the south Mediterranean. How? Very simple. We can, apart from cultural actions, apart from scholarship for students coming from Tunisia, Algeria, and for example, we funded, thanks to the support of the Fondazione Banco di Sardegna, a complete cycle of study for Algerian, Moroccan, and Tunisian students, 3 years or 5 years in Cagliari and Sassari. So it's a very challenging thing for us because we selected 100 students, and now they are starting this year, and they will finish in more or less 3 or 5 years. It will depend from the course they choose. Apart from cultural actions, etc., our main field of action is to promote the cooperation within the framework of the European Commission. So we have lots of programs and projects presented under the Erasmus Plus Capacity Building Action, H2020, LIFE, and other programs of the European Commission. For example, we have a very interesting project for the internationalization of Libyan universities. We have as partner Tripoli University, Zawiya University, Misrata University, and obviously Sirte University. Our mission and our vision at the same time are focused on the idea of trying to understand what are the real needs of the Arab world and of our partners coming from the North Africa and Middle East. We have to face real needs, and our association was founded in 1989, so we have more than 25 years of activity, meaning that we are answering to a real necessities coming from the north of the Mediterranean. At the same time, we have obviously different relationship with our partners according to their situation. We cannot say that we have the same relationship with Morocco with respect to Libya or Syria or Jordan or Lebanon. Each country of the Mediterranean is a world apart. We cannot generalize. We cannot use the same statistics, the same ideas. We cannot apply the same perspective if you want to have a relationship with Moroccan partners or if you want to have a relationship with Syrian partners. The Arab world is not an homogeneous one, and also the Islamic world at the same time is not an homogeneous one. It's something plural with lots of expression according to history, ethnic groups, social logics, etc., etc., etc. And this complexity is also recently recognized in official manner by the European Commission with 2 documents. The first one is the joint communication for the review of the neighborhood policy. The neighborhood policy is the instrument used by the European Commission in order to set up priorities for the next year's priorities for cooperation. And in this document, released 1 week and a half ago, more or less, we find that the main action is to receive indication from the Arab world. We cannot impose something according to what is written in the joint communique for the review. We cannot impose something. We have to we have to cooperate with them on the same level. Without this action, our action will not be effective. We'll only lose time, resources, money, etc. On the other side, we have had recently, 2 weeks ago, a summit in Europe, and with the declaration, the Valletta Declaration, explaining that again is a political declaration with an action plan, saying that we cannot avoid from having an equal relationship between Europe and the rest of the Mediterranean countries. This is the base, and after we can implement our relationship. So in Unamid we have also a small think tank, a small research unit, and we try in our research unit to give voices to our associated partner, and also to respect this kind of approach, meaning that we cannot generalize, we have to go into details, use local sources, primary sources. We have, for example, we can rely on Arabic sources, sources coming from local library, having interview with locals, doing field research, etc., etc. This is our approach. And today I would like to present a specific case, which is the one of Salafism in Egypt, in order to show you how can the Islamist world can be really complex and really difficult to understand. Obviously, it's obvious to say that the expression of political Islamism for me, meaning the expression of political Islam, and obviously it's obvious to say that we have different expression of political Islam at different level. For example, in Morocco, we have a political party inspired to Islam, which is actually part of the government. This is the same case in Tunisia, where Ennahda was also part of the Quartet for Peace, and they won also the Nobel Prize recently. Is not the case of Libya, where we have Islamist militias, for example, armed groups with violent action. Is the case of Egypt, when we have had the Muslim Brotherhood, but at the same time some extremist group in the Sinai. We have in Lebanon, we have the Hezbollah as the main expression of political Islam in the country, but Hezbollah is a Shia movement, differently from other Sunni movements, so it's something else again. And we have the example of the Iranian state with a very particular structure where we have at the same time religious and politics, not on the same level, but interacting each other in a very complex system. So the expression of political Islam are so different, and we cannot interact with them at the same level. Even if we have a specific look on one specific country and one specific movement, we will see evolution. For example, let's have the case of Egypt. Egypt is facing a process of transition from 2011 until nowadays. I don't want to call it revolution, because in my opinion nothing more or less is changed in the country, or nothing less is changed in the country. We don't have a real social change, political change, and economic change. The economy is still controlled by the army, more or less 40% of the economy, and the actors are more or less still the same respected than the past. But we can see in the country an evolution of the political forces. For example, if we have a look at the Muslim Brotherhood was able to win the election, parliamentary election, and the presidency in the country. And but after 1 year of staying in power, the president Morsi was removed by the actual president Al-Sisi, and the Muslim Brotherhood are nowadays outlawed. So they are not part of no more part of the life of the country, even if Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928. So they have Muslim Brotherhood have a long history. We cannot deny that it's part of the Egyptian history under Jamal Abdel Nasser, under Anwar Sadat, and under Hosni Mubarak, and under Al-Sisi. So the Muslim Brotherhood is part of the history of the country, but today, nowadays, is absolutely out of the scenario. But what is very interesting is that if the Muslim Brotherhood are not part of the system, we have another Islamist forces called Salafism, which is actually part of the system. Salafism is a very complicated word. We can translate Salafism, meaning that Salafism refers to the Arab word Salaf, meaning the ancient representative of Islam. So Salafism is a sort of pure interpretation of Islam. But again, it's not a monolithic word. We have three main expressions of Salafism. The first one, the quietist Salafism. People who are not interested in take part in social and political life of the country because the sovereignty of the country is not in the hand of God. At the opposite, we have movementist Salafists, meaning that we have people say we cannot take part in politics, but we can provide welfare for our population, and we have to re-Islamize society with a bottom-up approach, and we have to start with the new interpretation of Islam, Quran, tradition, Sunnah, etc., 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 with a renewal of the religion. And we have jihadi Salafist, meaning with this word, violent jihadi Salafist, meaning armed groups, such we can consider, for example, in a way, Daesh, ISIS. They share, in a way, the same ideology, but they have different application on the ground. For example, quietist Salafists and movementist Salafists, they reject violence, absolutely saying we cannot obtain our goals with violence, but we have to obtain our goals with a long-term process, or waiting for God coming on the earth and creating his state, or at the opposite, re-Islamizing society with a bottom-up approach. This is the idea of Salafism. Violent Salafism is another thing. And we have also different expression of Salafism. Last week we have had a lesson with a colleague of mine from London explaining the difference between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And it was a very interesting speech from London. So, in any case, if you are quietist, if you are movementist, if you are violent, in theory, you share a radical vision of Islam, inspired by Wahhabism, which is a very particular and very strong, very hard interpretation of the religion. And in theory, you cannot be part of the political life of the country. So if you are a quietist, you stay apart from social and political life. If you are movementist, you rely only on the possibility to provide welfare system for your associates. And if you are violent, you stay apart from the political life of the country. But after 2011, which was very surprising for us and for Egyptian too in a way, we have had one very specific political project inspired by Salafism in the country, which is called Al-Nur. Al-Nur, in Arabic, we can translate it in English as the light. Al-Nur is a political party controlled by the major Salafist association of the country in Alexandria, and the association is called Dawah Salafiyya, Salafism propaganda, which actually rely on the idea of being a movementist Salafism. So they provide the welfare, I don't know, social services for people in Egypt. They provide everything for their associate members. And at the beginning, you can expect two things, more or less, from their. First one, they share the same ideological framework of the Muslim Brotherhood, so they will be ally. And you can expect from them they will not lose their ideological framework, because it is a long history. They have a long history on the issue, so they cannot lose in 1, 2, 3 years their ideological. So in theory, Al-Nur is a very non-pragmatic movement, a non-pragmatic political party, in opposition with the state, because the state obviously is ruled by a general, Al-Sisi, from the army, which is not God. It happens absolutely the opposite. Al-Nur is now part of the government. They act as a sort of loyal opposition to the government. They share with the government some goals, and they destroyed in 3 years their ideological framework. Why? For the power. They decided to implement a real strong political project based on a high level of pragmatism. Saying that we have to survive at political level. How can we survive? Making an alliance with the government. So all our ideology means nothing. This is surprising because it's the first time in Egyptian history that we have a Salafist group at the elections, and is acting in the opposite way respected of what we can expect from them. And this is challenging for Egyptians, and it's challenging also for us as a researcher, because we have to understand why. Probably, as happened for other Islamist movements, it is not the first time that they use a high level of pragmatism. Probably we cannot consider them only as radical and extremist and non-pragmatist movement. Probably we have to change a little bit our mind on the issue and use a different perspective. The problem is, another problem, is working. This new strategy for Salafism is a good strategy for them or not? According to the last election, they are out of the parliament. We have now election in Egypt. The election in Egypt can last for 2 months, more or less. So we have the first round ballot, and after it lasts for 2 months. So you have time to analyze the election, and also to make fraud, obviously. And the very important thing is that they are punished by their electoral basis, because the electoral basis cannot recognize them as a Salafist and Islamist movement, and so they are now be punished. They are not part of the system. They have had more or less 100 seats, and now they have 10, 15 seats. The level of pragmatism is adopted by Islamist movement is very clear for other movements. For example, for Hezbollah, it's very clear in the history of Hezbollah, making alliances with Christians, making alliances with other political forces is very clear in the history of the Middle East. And also for Hamas in Palestine, I remember a very curious thing. When they won the election at the municipal level, they controlled more or less from 10 to 20 local municipalities. And in theory, a member of Hamas cannot talk with the Israeli because they do not recognize Israeli. This is in theory. In practice, after they won the local election, they were forced to cooperate with Israeli on waste management, because it was impossible to rule the cities on the border without cooperating on the waste management. It was a very big problem, because the problem with Islamism is that you have a theory, you have an ideological background. When you are a social movement, everything is okay. You can use rhetoric, you can use propaganda. The problem is that when you put in practice, in politics, in the struggle for power, your ideological framework, and then you will have a lot of problems. And this is happened for Hamas in Palestine, for Hezbollah. For Hezbollah, for example, after 2000, after the liberation of the south of the country, it was a very big ideological question, how to reinvent the ideology of Hezbollah after 2000, and they are still searching for something. But also in our perspective, we cannot consider as researcher, in my opinion, the Islamic world and the Arab Islamic world as a whole. We have to analyze case by case, and we have to analyze even in some countries, movements by movements. We have in Egypt more or less 15 Salafist movements formed by small groups, and no one can be representative of everyone. We have to analyze, we have to rely on sources, we have to analyze that translating documents, translating, I don't know, for my PhD thesis, I translated, for example, all the documents of Hezbollah from 1985 until 2009. And it was interesting to see the evolution from a linguistic point of view, from the social point of view, from the military point of view also. In order to conclude, I think that in order to analyze Middle East, we have to recognize complexities. This is the first thing. We have to recognize that it's not everything black and white, but we have gray zones. We have a lot of gray zones, and we have to try to differentiate among countries, among political parties, and using also different perspective. And try to follow the indication of Edward Said and lose our Orientalist perspective, and try to find a new perspective using and having a strong relationship with the Arab and Islamic world in order to understand their needs. Without that, I think no analysis can be effective and no action can be useful for us. Thank you very much.
I did literature before, and I know that literature carries a memory of nations, of cultures, and a Mediterranean, which the great D.H. Lawrence called the middle of the world, is a place that carries memories for different cultures and communities. I will be making more reflections than going through a full-fledged paper. And in this, I present the idea of Mediterranean Islam as an aquatic identity. It's hybrid. It's full of differences, sometimes contradictions, and builds on periods of history of this shared Mediterranean. And I will be focusing mostly on a particular historical period in Islamic history that still resonates in the air of Muslim consciousness, and be they reformists, be they laymen, be they artists, be they politicians, and it's the Andalusian period, or what some call Muslim Spain of medieval times. Brodel was mentioned before by our keynote in the morning, and he makes reference to three main civilizations that contributed to the Mediterranean. It's the Greeks, the Romans, and the Arab Muslim civilizations or entities. It is through this scheme that I will be making these reflections based on a few contemporary so-called progressists or reformists. Miriam Cook, American scholar at Duke University, called for, in an article, she's not specialized in the Mediterranean, but in a short piece that's interesting, called for the Medizen, or Mediterranean citizen, in an article in 2001 or something like that, and asked for the need for Mediterranean thinking, where an aquatic epistemology is needed to give space to this aspired for Mediterranean culture. And the contemporary reformists I will be referring to are mainly, or is mainly Mohamed Arkoun, the Algerian French, who died in 2010. Maybe I will be clarifying my notes on him later. I'll go back to my note on poetry. Andalusian Arandi wrote a poem in 1285 speaking of the place of the Andalus, or Muslim Spain in Islamic memory. That's read everywhere in the Islamic world as part of literature and glorious days of the culture or civilization. And this is shared by not only Arabs, but only Muslim consciousness in other parts of the world. I refer to the Iqbalian, Muhammad Iqbal, great poet philosopher, Pakistani, Indian. I wrote a poem in 1932 called Masjid Cordoba, the Mosque of Cordoba. He passed through Spain while negotiating independence with the British in London in the period, in the Second Congress. And it's widely read and widely translated in other languages, especially in the Arab Islamic world. After that, that's also part of the Arabic literature now, is the Egyptian prince of literature, Ahmad Shawqi, the Egyptian Ahmad Shawqi, died in 1932, who was in exile in Spain and toured Spain and wrote poetry on the past. And until now, there is a whole section in Arabic literature called Andalusiyat, Andalusian literature, and how it still impacts or impacted Arab Islamic literature since the times. In the city where I come from, in the east of Morocco, there is even Andalusian music called Cordoba music, and it's full of classic poetry. Some of that is the one I mentioned here, or others that are sung in melodious tone. In Iran, which is not on the Mediterranean, also thinks of the Mediterranean, apart from the politics, it's also in culture. The Canadian philosopher of Iranian origin, Ramin Jahan Beglu, has written recently a piece on return to Cordoba, and it's from his piece that I get the name Cordoba Paradigm, or Nasaq Cordoba, as space for multiculturalism that we can build on. And just in mid-November this year, there was a conference in Tehran, in a reputed university, Tabatabai University, called The Heritage of Al-Andalus, between Persia and Iberia. So among European Muslims, Al-Andalus is also a reference, and it was referred to in the morning Critical Muslim magazine, edited by the renowned British polymath Sardar, Ziauddin Sardar. In 2013, the issue was Critical Muslim number 6. They devoted a whole section, the whole issue on reclaiming Al-Andalus, and they saying that the scholars contributing of different orientations, European, and Muslims and non-Muslims. And the idea that the issue defended was that Al-Andalus is a heritage for everyone. So it's with these reflections that I think the Andalus, just to make a point that Al-Andalus still resonates in the conscience of the Ummah, or this civilization. Of course, not every scholar agrees on how it is thought about. The Salafis, of the extreme Salafis, or the violent, who think of politically with medieval eyes, they think of Al-Andalus politically. So it's a land to get back, the way ISIS thinks of. But the mainstream is not that, and especially among the reformists. And I situate this period of thinking of Al-Andalus in the third stage. I have three stages in these relations around the Mediterranean between the Arab world and the European world. Three fertilizing moments, I call them. The first is the medieval times. Well, I'm, of course, doing a lot of delete option here, using delete a lot of scissors, because there are the dark sides there, of course. The medieval Greek-Arab exchange and what it brought about. And then the first Nahda, or what's called in the literature of Arab Islamic studies, Arab Islamic Renaissance of 18th and 19th century, which some, like Oxford scholar Albert Horani, situates in 1840 to 1940. So that's the first wave of Nahda, and contact with the West and exchange. And the second is post-World War with Muslims in Europe and then the reformists in the Arab world. So that's another phase, which is continuity of this Arab Islamic Renaissance of the 1840s until now. So this work of considering the Mediterranean as oasis for thought belongs to this historical period of the third fertilizing moment in Arab Islamic history. For another scholar of Islam, he wrote a brilliant article just 3 days ago. Cleves Kessler in Sydney, he said that he put political Islam, even the violent one, let alone the mainstream none, in the third stage, but different from the one that I a little bit I outlined. The Mediterranean was heavily, well, let's say Roman and later on Christian. But the coming of Islam made a drift, made a big gap there. The Mediterranean is divided between northern that is Christian or now post-Christian and the still Muslim or Islamic, Arab Islamic world. The second wave is the post-revelation moment of post-Muhammad, where Muhammad and his sunnah, his heritage, becomes the reference. And all that period of post-Muhammad goes from that medieval times with Crusades time and medieval Orientalist depiction of Muhammad as violent, as non-acceptable in the literature from the, let's say, the European or Christian perspective. And how this Muhammad as a character bearing a worldview has become so much entrenched in the psyche of the Arab Muslim, and you could see it through the cartoons and their events. And you can see it through small example that not everyone, but so many are named Muhammad, and we have made a joke about that. So the name of Muhammad, the character of Muhammad, carries the tradition of Islam. Of course, he is not, he's still considered an individual, and Muslims make a difference that he is not God, he's just a mediator. But that mediation is what led the Arabs to enter world history and gave them space in history before medieval or antique times. So the history of the last 2,000 years at least. So it is that thing of what Muhammad brings and the issues that it leads to, the violence, the non-acceptance of caricaturizing a model of ethics for the Arab Islamic world that is at the heart of the problem in Europe and in the whole Mediterranean now. That's why I say the name Muhammad is an issue because it's a work in progress, and there is a search for recognition. The Muslim consciousness is searching for recognition from Europe that denies that. And that's why Al-Andalus is prominent. And that's why it is always brought as an example when talking to the Europeans. Christian or post-Christian, secular or atheist, it's the modern West. So there is a lot of history boiling there, and Al-Andalus makes sense. And that's why I take Muhammad Arkoun as an example. If time allows, I'll make a reference to another figure that I work on, Muhammad Abid al-Jabri, a Moroccan philosopher. They both died in 2010. Arkoun is an Algerian of Berber descent, and he lived most of his time in France, teaching at Sorbonne, as you know, and was buried in Morocco afterwards. Arkoun was obsessed with the idea of deconstruction. And he defended the idea of historical solidarities, or among at least the three divine religions, like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. He says they belong, for him, they belong to one civilization. And it's only dogmatic politics that harbor or prevent that historical solidarity. For him, he says that I want to deconstruct cultures. I don't miss history. For him, Ibn Andalus doesn't look for it with a nostalgic eye, because he wants to build on it but overcome it. That's why, for him, comparison among theologies and histories is important. He criticizes the theologians of all the three main religions of the Mediterranean, and the philosophers, whose look remains not enough, and the politicians. So he defends the idea of new philosophers, and he was an admirer of Braudel, and he tried to build on that. He calls for a new search of, he says that there is no serious, apart from Braudel's attempt, no serious literature on the Mediterranean. It still has to be built to overcome institutionalized ignorance. And he blames the West for the antagonism there is now between the Arab and the Islamic world. He also is critical of modernity in its European understanding, but he launches his main critique on Islamic tradition. He says at least the Judeo-Christian tradition, they have gone through philological work, they have gone through revising the tradition, what revelation means, and the Islamic tradition is behind that. He also brings, he says that there are socio-political issues there, and sometimes the Arab Islamic world is deprived from that right of doing its own revision. So that it's always in the defense. And that's why he blames the West and Euro-modernity in that sense. He says that the Arab Islamic world is facing two gaps. First, a gap with its own tradition, and one of its references or niches of the past he's talking about here is Al-Andalus. And the second one is a gap with the modern epistemologies or modern Europe. I will not go through how he proposes to deconstruct the Arab Islamic tradition and revelation. For some, he is the extreme Salafis. He's not Muslim anymore because he revises, he attacks, to use the term, he just studies the revelation and what it means historically, sociopolitically. That's why, unlike some Arab scholars, he coins or works on develops critique of Islamic reason, while his contemporary Al-Jabri, he works on critique of Arab reason. So these are two different, they may seem similar, and of course they intertwine, but they are different schools. For Arkoun thinks that it's the religious dogma that is that should be revised. While Al-Jabri, briefly, Al-Jabri says it's the Arab culture that has to be shaken, not the revelation per se. Revelation is translated, is interpreted by the Arabs mainly. So the critique should be to the Arab culture, while Arkoun says no, let's go further. So that's why he accuses Al-Jabri not being so daring. While the other, Al-Jabri, doesn't see problem with religion per se. He sees it in culture and how humans interpret it. So these have developed volumes on that. So that's why Arkoun uses the term the emergent reason. The emergent reason is neither, it's philosophic, but he denies it to be philosophic because philosophy for him also has become stagnant and anaestheticist in certain ways. And it's not theologic, so it's on the move. It's a reason on the move. It's perpetual reason, and he calls it the emergent or the emerging reason. I read a short paragraph. It is concerned with the philosophical subversion of the use of reason itself, and all forms of rationality produced so far, and those which will be produced in the future, so as not to repeat the ideological compromises and derivations of the precedent postures and performances of reason. In that sense, the emergent reason, the emergent reason will be continuously emerging to reassess its critical function. Well, it's a reason or thinking in process, and that's why some call him postmodernist, but he refuses the term. It's through this emergent reason that spirituality, a spiritual responsibility, can give value to dignity of man. He defines dignity of man through spiritual responsibility that is not dogmatic. It builds on religions, but not the classical or dogmatic way we have inherited them from all our traditions. And I think that this emergent reason, in my reading, has reference, or historically, in 3 names. He gives 3 names as mediators of Mediterranean culture. 3 names belonging to 3 main religions. He gives Ibn Rushd, who died in 1198, is the same generation, 1198, in Marrakesh, born in Cordoba, medieval rationalist Muslim philosopher, who was quoted and referred to by Ibn Maimonides, who died in Cairo and was born in Cordoba. So you can see also the migration, sometimes for bad reasons, because they were exiled. but they were expelled, yes. But they were also lecturing. like in Bijaya and Tunis. And Thomas Aquinas died 1274. So these are for him 3 figures that can teach the contemporary generation of 2 main things: a pluralism, how to coexist, and how to overcome one's own tradition and still be hosted by that tradition, be confident with that tradition, but at the same time not making it the only true tradition. Of course, especially with Thomas Aquinas, he was critical a little bit of Ibn Rushd, and he was critical of also philosophers, but not to the extent of saying they are out of their way, as Al-Ghazali did in the Islamic tradition. And there are others, but these are the main philosophers he refers to. So Arkoun coins a lot of terms. He says that we need to develop a sociology of success and failure, and to see how these theologies and how these theologians failed to be dominant. All this to overcome sectarianism, nationalism, racism, secularism in sense of anti-religious secularism, towards to show us also, these theologians can show us how their intellectual caliber, their did not antagonize with the idea of religion or divine love. So that's one of the main things he underlines. So why they did this? Because they kept theology and philosophy separate. They attacked each other at certain moments, but that difference remained there. You know, each has its own place. Religion does not antagonize with science or does not antagonize with philosophy. They are different disciplines. They enrich each other. They antagonize, but that antagonism should not be violent. They should coexist the way Jews, Muslims, and Christians coexisted mainly in the Andalusian experience. So his God is an open God, as he calls it. I think I will. I already mentioned Al-Jabri and his philosophy. Al-Jabri is another big name in Arab Islamic philosophy. Is the one I said wrote Critique of Arab Reason and devoted 30 years for it. And he differentiated between Maghreb philosophy and Mashriq philosophy. Mashriq meaning the East or Levantine philosophy, and Maghreb meaning North Africa and Andalusia. And Al-Jabri was a neo-Averroist. He revised the works of Averroes, and he called himself a neo-Averroist. And he says that Averroes was the harbinger of modernity, of secularism, and the Arab world missed that chance, and the Europeans got it. And we have to go back to that tradition and rebuild and build on it. Al-Jabri is also not happy with Eurocentrism because that legacy of Ibn Rushd is denied. Well, of course, there should be a recognition in the mainstream Western philosophy, etc. But who should do that recognition? That's another question. Yeah. So the debate then is there whether there should be a return to Ibn Rushd or not. Or build neo Averroism. So that's the school that is developing. Even Ernest Renan, the great French Orientalist, he had a lecture with the reformist Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani in 1880s, and he said that the Islamic world had no rational philosophers; they had only one, and it is Ibn Rushd. Well, of course, scholars don't agree with that. So the point is that in Arab, contemporary Arab Islamic thought, there is then now a debate. Is the future Averroist, neo-Averroist, post-Averroist, or it's Ghazalist, the other scholar who lived some 3-4 decades before Ibn Rushd, and he's the dominant scholar. He is sometimes misinterpreted as having attacked philosophy, and that's why philosophy in the Arab Islamic world died with him, or some few decades after him, with Ibn Rushd as the last philosopher. But actually that's not true, because other historians, even the French scholar Henry Corbin, says that Islamic philosophy didn't die with Ibn Rushd. Yes, it became so weak because it was no longer taught in seminaries, in Islamic universities, etc. But it remained, it lived here and there. It lived with the great Ibn Khaldun, the historiographer, or for some, in Toynbee's term, is the founder of what we call now sociology, or Sahrawardi, some considered by some the existentialist of 16th century Iran. So that's where the debate is, whether Averroes was the last or should be built upon, or there is some other alternative. The work of Wa'il Hallaq brings another Wa'il Hallaq, based in Colombia, in his recent work, which was well circulated and well critiqued also, The Impossible State. It was written before the Islamic State, ISIS, was born. That's why I use ISIS, I use IS to mean the impossible state. Well, that's another discourse. So I borrow his title to his impossible state. I borrow the word, but because Hallaq says that the Islamic tradition was mainly, the moral order of the Islamic world was not political per se, it was mainly civil society moral or morality or ethics. So that's why he says that Sharia ethic cannot only be equivalent to enlightenment, but can even be considered higher than it, seeing the damage we see of modernity now. So he's critical, of course, and there is a lot of things to say there, but I think I should stop there, and yeah. So that's where the debate is. Thank you.